Our names would become legend. Bonnie and Clyde, lovers and outlaws. Together we'd raise hell. And hell is where we'd end up.
Clyde Barrow, the most ruthless killer the Southwest has ever known, stealing automobiles, robbing banks, killing without mercy.
Clyde was just one of those bad guys, and they're out there who would die before going back to prison.
They said, Frank, hunt them down and take them out, because these kids aren't just outlaws, they're killers.
What attracted this strange pair to each other will never be known.
It was clear as day to me. You want to take Clyde down? I'll be right by his side.
They weren't these modern-day Robin Hoods anymore. They were vilified.
People think they know Bonnie and Clyde, but they don't know the truth.
Hamer thinks he knows us. Well, know this. We've got faster cars, bigger guns, and what's more, we've got each other. It was the happiest moment of my life. Lying down in that ditch, freezing my ass off. All the thieving, all the bloodshed, that was all just means to an end. A way to get back at Easton Prison. They'll pay for what they did to me there. They'll pay dearly.
Clyde Barrow wasn't really interested in money. He was driven by revenge, actually. That was his whole motivation.
They put him in one of the most ruthless and brutal prison systems in the United States. Eastern Prison Farm was known for that.
Clyde Barrow was committed to getting out of prison, getting a gang together, coming back to Eastham, raiding Eastham, and as he said, turning everybody loose, shoot every damn one of these guards.
We brought in 2 Colt 45s for our guys on the inside. When the shooting started, we got up and let them have it. Revenge on Eastham, that was sweet. Setting 5 guys free. And best of all, my gal Bonnie waited for me in the getaway car, ready to hit the road.
It's almost a calling. It's almost a religion. It's spiritual. Because there's so many other ways they could have gone, particularly Bonnie could have gone any other way. She chose this life of crime, this fast lane life of crime with Clyde Barrow.
5 days later, the Texas Department of Corrections asked me to go after Clyde and his girl Bonnie. Seems the local deputies weren't having much success.
Frank Hamer was a legend in Texas. A state I happen to be from that loves its legends, loves its Texas Rangers, and Frank Hamer was one of them.
Hamer was a one-man army, not because of bravado. He's a very quiet man, but he was literally a tall Texan. He stood 6'3", a trim man. The look in his face was one of, he was very serious about what he did, about what he knew.
I said, how much are you gonna pay me to do that? And they said, half as much as you're getting right now.
Frank Hamer was recruited by Lee Simmons of the Texas Prison Association. Lee Simmons looked him up, went to his home unannounced, and said, I need you to put Bonnie and Clyde on the spot and shoot everyone in sight. That was his mission.
What made Frank Hamer special is he was a lone agent who could go anywhere and do anything, the law be damned. In a time where existing law enforcement almost certainly was not going to get Bonnie and Clyde anytime soon, this was, frankly, a brilliant move.
Hamer, in his own words, said that Barrow was so wily and so hard to catch. It was like a big challenge, you know.
The conditions in West Dallas were abhorrent. It was a tenement settlement, basically, is what it was. And the Barrow family fit right in with that, because that's what they were. They were itinerant farmers.
Who built this place? What put us here? And how do we get out again? We're asking. Just asking.
Money in the day, the Depression era, was so hard to come by. It was like a thirsty man in the desert looking for water. When you found it, you reveled in it. It was a lifesaver.
Well, one thing about Clyde, he hated poverty. He hated being poor. And he always liked to dress nice, and look good.
The Great Depression sure did turn upstanding men into petty criminals. But Clyde Barrow was never upstanding in the first place.
Clyde Barrow got into crime probably because it was seductive to him. He had an older brother, Buck, and Buck was quite involved in crime, especially auto theft and burglary. And it was probably fun because he could have a little bit of money when no one else had any money. Clyde Barrow eventually wound up in prison for burglary and auto theft.
Inside of the Eastham dormitories, there were men called building tenders. We would call them trustees. And so the life inside the dormitories was basically regulated by other prisoners. And it was fairly brutal.
There was this bank robber out of Houston named Ed Crowder. Ed liked to pick on smaller convicts, and he often liked to rape them.
I ain't much for religion, but Eastham made me believe in hell.
So Clyde was getting the treatment from Ed Crowder, but Clyde was the wrong person to go after.
Clyde had hid a piece of pipe that he had found and hid it in the bathroom, and he went to the bathroom. He knew Crowder was going to follow him.
And sure enough, he does. And Crowder comes up behind him, and Clyde pulls out that pipe and just takes off the top of his head. Another convict, another trustee, was in on it with him. His name was Aubrey Skelly, and Skelly was serving a life sentence. Clyde actually killed Ed Crowder, but Skelly came running up with a knife and started stabbing him and shouting and making a lot of noise while Clyde just kind of slipped into the dormitory. So Clyde killed him and Skelly took the rap.
But this is where Clyde changes. His whole demeanor has now changed. He's witnessed some horrible situations, and he carries it with him for the rest of his life.
I got out of that hellhole after 2 years. Once you kill a man, something changes. They go up fast.
I'm not going back to that hellhole, he said. They will have to kill me first. Clyde Barrow was attracted to Bonnie because she was cute and vivacious and just a lot of fun to be around.
Her husband, Roy Thornton, was away in prison. She was an abandoned young wife. And she found in Clyde the same kind of daring-do qualities that she had loved in her husband.
I think Bonnie was a drama queen who seemed to have adopted an identity out of soap opera magazines and pulp movies.
She's real enough to me. Just dynamite. You're smart, too. Ain't no one gonna put one past her. That cue's all hell, little smile she get when she about to do something bad.
When they met, it was love at first sight, and he saw a lot of gumption in her. He saw that she was a pretty smart little cookie. From that point on, they were inseparable.
Game for anything. Gas station, payroll, armories, auto theft. You loved it, right?
Sure. And pretty quick, I started to love you as well. One day, I was kicking my heels in West Dallas, wanted to slip my wrists out of boredom. The next, I was running shotgun with Clyde. And oh my gosh, it was right where I wanted to be.
man, there was this fast life. They were living the fast lane. She just, it was an adrenaline rush for her, just as much as it was for Clyde. And so I think that was part of the attraction just as much as the bling. It was the adrenaline.
Bonnie's a good gal, but two of us ain't enough. We need help, especially if we're gonna get back and raid Easton Prison.
Every outlaw worth his salt needs a gang, right?
First, we pick up a kid I knew, W.D. Jones.
W.D. was one of my dad's friends. Clyde says, "You got the stomach for it, boy?" And he said, "Yep." And so he gets in the car.
And then my brother Buck and his wife Blanche. We brought him along for the ride. We were a pretty good team. We didn't score the big payouts. Then again, we didn't want to.
Clyde didn't actually rob that many banks. He was more small potatoes. He was filling stations. He was payroll clerks. He was breweries. He was train stations where he'd rob ticket offices.
Wasn't just robbing, it was killing. Down in West Dallas, their old stomping grounds, they shoot a deputy sheriff, a guy named Davis. Well, that attracts attention.
Clyde had walked into a trap that was set up for another criminal. And when Malcolm Davis came around, he had a weapon in his hand. Clyde fired, killing the guy. Clyde's fate is sealed now. He's an ex-con. He's going to go to prison now for murder, and they're going to execute him. And he knew that.
So Barrow's got nothing to lose. He raises the stakes, starts raiding National Guard armories.
The military Browning automatic rifle would become Clyde's heavy weapon of choice.
That was a scary little weapon. It fired a 20-shot magazine in under 3 seconds.
Now, Buck taught me how to handle a rifle, but this was a whole different can of beans. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. This ain't no pop gun.
Well, your typical county sheriff or his deputy or a local marshal would have a handgun, probably a .38. The sheriff's in his car might carry a shotgun. By and large, they would be outgunned by someone like Clyde Barrow, who took this very serious. This was life or death with him.
What happened next would make me and Clyde famous.
Put us right in the line of fire. Live or die, I ain't gonna die without a fight. Me and Bonnie were picking up the pace. Gas station, payroll, anything to make a buck. Shooting that deputy in West Dallas wasn't part of the plan. They pinned up pictures on walls calling me a murderer. It was time to lie low for a while.
Buck, he liked to drink a lot. Missouri was one of the early states to legalize 3.2% beer, which was just fine for Buck. And they were bringing boatloads of beer in there, and they were drinking and hooping it up till way late at night.
Okay, so we're a little on the rambunctious side. Overexcited, you could say.
Well, Buck had been drinking again. I was reading Clyde my poetry. But the neighbors got all sore about the empty beer bottles and the music and all that.
Law enforcement was contacted. And because of the amount of alcohol, they thought they had some bootleggers in the place. So they got a search warrant, a liquor search warrant is what they got.
The Joplin police didn't know who they were dealing with.
There's a brief but intense gunfight.
2 of the policemen are shot within the first 45 seconds to a minute.
Before long, all the officers have run out of ammunition.
Clyde was able to function in these situations. For some reason, he's able to continue to think and act decisively in the middle of everything going wrong.
The ferocity of the firepower says nothing but, you are not taking us. Not without a fight, anyway. In their haste to get out of Joplin, the Barrow brothers and Jones and Bonnie and Blanche had to leave everything behind. And among the things that were left behind was a cache of weapons, there was some jewelry, there was several stacks of photographs, and several rolls of unprocessed film. that the police had processed, and they instantly had photographs of the perpetrators of the double murder there in Joplin.
No one paid us much mind until we had to split from Joplin in a hurry. And every Tom, Dick, and Harry got a knifeful of our holiday snaps.
Joplin did make them players on the criminal stage, if you will. Suddenly the public saw them as something a little different, a little more glamorous.
When you look at the Joplin photos, you get the idea of young people in love, pointing guns at each other, laughing, smoking cigars, incidentally very stylishly dressed. Bonnie's clothing actually projected a kind of Wild West look, like a Belle Star. The skirts were much longer than the fashions of the day, so it presented an anti-hero, and in her image, an anti-heroine, which was something quite new for society.
The newspapers were having a field day with this. Other than the Depression and the Dust Bowl, there wasn't that much to write about, so they wrote about their local anti-heroes, who happened to be Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde were definitely folk heroes, especially early on. They're even described in newspapers as modern-day Robin Hoods. He gave away vast amounts of money to friends and family.
Folk heroes? Modern-day Robin Hood? The hell with that. They were murderers, psychopaths.
Clyde did not want his name in the paper. He didn't want any of those photographs. Clyde's feeling was the more notoriety you get, the hotter you get. And he didn't want any of that heat. He didn't like it. He did not like it.
Relax, Clyde. You've got to make a living, too.
Who cares? Forget about it. For me, it was all about raiding Easton Prison. All I needed was enough guns and enough people so I can go back there.
Yeah, I know. Raise hell.
They're gonna enact revenge. And it's all Clyde Barrow's revenge, really.
So these young, pretty killers hit the road. Local law didn't stand a chance.
They would commit a crime in Oklahoma. Next thing anybody knew, they were somewhere near Chicago, Illinois. They would be in Minnesota. They would be back to Nebraska. From the time they committed a crime, they would put at least 600 to 1,000 miles between them and wherever it was they're going to wind up. It was hard. You couldn't predict.
I realize they're keeping close to the state lines, switching jurisdictions at the drop of a hat.
I thought of him more as a statistician. Every move that he made, he had already calculated how he was going to leave. He had to leave in a hurry. He always made himself where he knew he had an exit.
If Clyde could get to his car and have even a couple of minutes head start, he was gone. He drove the back roads. His car was more important than his guns. In February 1932, Ford Motor Company comes out with their new line, and they're offering for the first time the option of a V8 engine. And this was the famous Ford V8. So if you had this V8, you had potentially the fastest car, and if you had the nerve of a Clyde Barrow to drive it right to the edge, you could almost always outrun any pursuit.
Here you see the new Ford V8 cars on the track.
We can run, but in truth, around every corner we run into a bullet or something worse.
Well, every lifestyle comes with a price. And Bonnie and Clyde certainly paid a price on numerous occasions.
In Joplin, it was flesh wounds for the most part. But old WD got it bad.
W.D. Jones had 2 holes in him and was in a lot of pain. Clyde did not want to stop. He wanted to get the heck out of there. Jones was convinced he'd been shot twice and that there were 2 bullets still in him. And Clyde wasn't so sure. So finally, Clyde just stopped the car and found a willow tree and cut a straight willow branch and wrapped gauze around it and dipped it in peroxide and just stuck it through one hole and poked it out the other hole just to show him it's a through and through shot. These are some tough people.
Pain was our daily, constant companion.
The one thing that I think where Clyde won Bonnie's devotion was where they went off into the Red River at Wellington, Texas.
We were driving like demons on our way to meet Buck and Blanche. Guess I ain't seen the bridge up ahead was all washed out.
Bonnie was trapped inside his car.
The battery turned upside down and spilled some acid on her right leg. At least second-degree burns on a large part of her leg. She never was able to walk normally after that.
And they couldn't go to a hospital. They couldn't, get doctors, so they treated the wounds themselves. I think Bonnie saw that Clyde was so distraught over her being injured, and I think when Bonnie saw that devotion in Clyde, that was the clincher.
Every step brings them closer to Easton Prison, but they ain't as sure-footed as they think.
Platte City is the first time that the police got ahead of them. Bonnie was recuperating, so they'd been laying low.
We rented out cabins in the middle of nowhere, but I had to go out and get poor Bonnie some medicine. Someone spotted me at the drugstore, and they called the local law.
The county sheriff was pretty sure he had some desperados in these cabins, and he gathered a posse. Unfortunately, they didn't reckon with Clyde's military automatic rifle. But there was a large amount of shooting. Buck, his brother, was hit in the head with a .45 slug. So he has this hideous head wound in his left temple. They managed to drag him in the car and get away. But this was the point at which things really started to turn bad.
Buck was a dead man. He knew it. I knew it.
We holed up in an old amusement park in Iowa, trying to play nurse to poor Buck. People seem to know who we are and seem to like shooting at us.
We just couldn't shake that damn posse.
Buck is in a bad way. He doesn't go very far before he finally lays down behind a log and says, "I'm done." He tells Clyde, "Take Blanche and run for it." Blanche says, "No way, I'm not gonna leave you." So she stays with Buck, and they are captured by the posse at this point.
Poor Buck. As for Blanche, well, she was just too loyal.
Some lucky newspaper man tagged along, snapped their pictures right after. Looks like Blanche still had some fight in her.
Eventually, they managed to cross a little river and wind up in a farmer's house across the river where they steal a car and are able to get away again. Nobody can believe it.
They're still running. Always running. And now they've lost Buck to a bullet and Blanche to jail. Everyone's waiting for that one slip-up. That one tip-off.
It won't be the cops that screw us. It'll be someone we know. Someone close.
We'll be ready with a magazine full of lead. With my brother dead and buried, and Blanche behind bars, we gotta take precautions, plan out our roads. Because you never know who's gonna spill the beans.
Mess everything up.
The most important thing in Bonnie and Clyde's lives during that crime spree was being able to come home to their families when they could. Keep in mind, these were still kids. They were very young.
If the family knew they were coming in, my grandmother, she'd call every member of the family. She says, "Well, I'm having a big pot of red beans or some fried chicken. She says, won't you come over?" That meant that Clyde and Bonnie were going to be there.
That was a risky thing. on both sides. It was not only risky for Bonnie and Clyde, it was risky for the family members.
And they made a mistake. They met at the same place 2 times in a row. The Barrow family has always believed that there was somebody in the inner circle that knew the details of this that tipped the police off.
What do you know? Bunch of deputies hiding in the bushes.
Clyde has a sixth sense about that kind of thing. He knew something was wrong and floored it. Still ended picking lead out of our damn legs.
I think that the reason that they endured all that they endured, the pain and the desperation, the fear, the moment-to-moment anxiety, because in large part because of Clyde's experience at Eastham. He said, I'm never going back. Clyde was just one of those bad guys, and they're out there who would die before going back to prison. Something clearly had died inside him, and he wasn't going to go back and have that happen again.
But Eastham's the one place Clyde can't keep away from.
It was probably one of the things that never happened before. Somebody would raid Eastham and free all these prisoners. It's something, first time in history somebody had done that.
This is where I come in. I was hired by Colonel Lee Simmons, general manager of the Texas prison system, to hunt down Bonnie and Clyde.
Frank Hamer and his contingent of lawmen adopted the very same lifestyle that Bonnie and Clyde were living on the road. And so he adopted their mindset. He ate what they ate. He slept when he thought they were sleeping. He camped out in his car when that was necessary, when no hotel rooms were around. He was pretty much on the lam himself, so to speak.
I sit down with one of the convicts recaptured after the escape. After a little persuasion, he spills the names of the men who joined the Barrow gang, including Henry Methvin.
Henry Methvin may very well have known Clyde in prison. He was there when Clyde was there, and he was part of the escape. Methvin, of course, was from northwest Louisiana and had family down there, so that became an area that Bonnie and Clyde would use for hideouts.
I think one of the smartest things Hamer did was pretty much let Bonnie and Clyde tighten their own noose. He told a reporter, he said, well, Bonnie and Clyde are not unlike wild horses. You give them enough time, and they're going to return to their known pasture. Hamer knew what their pasture was at that time. It was Louisiana. He reckoned that they had never committed a major crime in Louisiana.
Clyde and his girl were starting to get noticed by the higher-ups in Washington. We did get a visit from a couple of federal agents, but it seems they had a lot on their plate.
You would have thought, given the FBI's rise during this period, that the FBI would have gone after Bonnie and Clyde. In fact, while there's a file that suggests that they followed them a little, did a little digging around, they never went after them seriously.
The only law that federal officers can go after you for was interstate transportation of a stolen automobile. That was the only thing.
We know that some of the Dallas agents poked around, went to a bank robbery too, asked questions, never really took it real far.
The reader of the day was just eating the stuff up. Again, you have these dark heroes, if you will.
I ain't surprised people like Clyde. I like Clyde. Clyde is no saint, but he never set out to kill anyone for the hell of it.
Clyde murdered a lot of people, 10 or 12. I don't think he did it because he liked it. I don't think he did it because he was a murderer in his heart. He never planned to murder. He did it because that was the way he needed to get away from situations.
Clyde would tell his family he did not take any joy in shooting people, but it's almost like he would go on autopilot when these things would happen, and they almost always came out of nowhere. He kept moving, he kept thinking, and He had no hesitation at all in shooting. He approached this a lot like a soldier.
But Grapevine was different.
Grapevine was obviously simply cold-blooded murder.
One guy's too quick on the trigger. 2 dead cops that didn't deserve to die. Grapevine would change everything. Me and Bonnie, we're still alive. Posse taking pot shots, car wrecks, and now some Texas Rangers on our tail, like rabbits at a dog track, but still alive.
We didn't want to take the risk, but I was desperate to see my ma. And that took us back to Grapevine, where it all went to hell in a handbasket.
It was Easter Sunday. They were parked at this intersection in Grapevine, Texas, to meet up with some of Bonnie's family.
Clyde went to sleep in the back seat, and Bonnie had a bunny rabbit that she was going to give to her mom for Easter. Henry Methvin was outside the car, and these 2 motorcycle officers just happened to see the car sitting on the hill.
Guess it looked like we might be stranded out there.
Henry Methvin asked Clyde, he says, "It's the law." He said, "What do you do?" He said, "Let's take them."
In the past, when Bonnie would say, "Let's take them," it meant kidnap. It meant, let's tie them up, let's toss them in the back seat, let's take them out 40 miles down the dusty road, have a nice chat with them, give them some water, tie them to a tree with barbed wire, and let's leave. That's what that meant. But Methvin, not thinking clearly, thought, well, take them, we got guns. So they did. They shot them off their motorcycles. They were sucker punched.
From everything we know, it appears that Clyde didn't do it, that Methvin did it, and that Clyde was irked that he did it because there was no reason to.
Grapevine was obviously simply cold-blooded murder. These were 2 policemen who were simply shot down in the performance of their duty.
Bonnie and Clyde were boldly keeping a rendezvous with some of their henchmen near Grapevine, Texas. While they waited, they drank whiskey, made love to each other, and practiced their marksmanship by shooting at birds.
The press reports at the time, thanks in part to a fellow who claimed to witness this, claimed that Bonnie Parker shot and killed one of the motorcycle troopers as he lay wounded on the ground.
Every peace officer in the entire Southwest became so enraged over this killing, they pledged themselves to sleepless days and nights in their search for this murdering pair.
I don't think they got that quite right.
The guy was a mile away, and what's more, I heard he had bad eyesight.
They did everything they could to make Clyde and Bonnie look like deadly criminals, just murdering, anybody and everybody. They had to do something to make the public be against them.
But the public's perception of Bonnie and Clyde completely changed. They weren't these modern-day Robin Hoods anymore. They were vilified.
Grapevine was the turning point for Bonnie. She no longer has a way out.
This was Easter Sunday. This was an abomination. And here she was, accused of having participated in it freely. And now she was potentially facing the death penalty, so she was really in deep now.
Not so likable now, Bonnie and Clyde.
The pressure on these officers that were tracking Bonnie and Clyde had to have been tremendous. They had to know that they're tracking a very dangerous character who's not going to be taken alive. Now these 2 highway patrolmen are killed, and anytime law enforcement are killed, other law enforcement feel a greater pressure to do something about it.
It wasn't just Grapevine. As if to prove a point, 5 days later, they kill a 60-year-old constable in Oklahoma and kidnap the police chief.
Bonnie and Clyde did kidnap quite a few people, and some of them were actually law enforcement people.
Okay, so we took the police chief to Kansas, but we let him go, even gave him a clean shirt and a few bucks. I asked him to tell folks I don't smoke cigars, since after that stupid picture, everyone thinks I do. He said he would, and he did.
But 9 times out of 10, their kidnapped victims thought that these were really pretty nice kids.
Those nice kids weren't fooling me. I keep digging around in Louisiana until a local sheriff down there gives me an interesting piece of news. Clyde and the gang, I've been paying visits to the Methvin place.
Hamer realized that Louisiana was a place where he needed to set the snare.
Remember that little shot Paul Methvin showed us? I love that place.
Clyde Barrow developed this little fantasy world toward the end there. In this fantasy world, you can just settle down somewhere and everything can be forgotten. And he was serious about it. More than once he said, if the law would just leave me alone, I'll be okay.
I think if they were to sit down and think of it logically, the odds were overwhelming. They would have had to admit that they were probably going to end up like all the rest of these outlaws. And Clyde actually would say that to people. We know that they're going to get us eventually. Bonnie said the same thing. But I think the flip side is that in the back of their minds, they were always thinking, maybe we will beat the odds. Maybe we will be the exception to this rule.
You know, they did find this little place in the woods where they could be themselves and be left alone. And it was this little shack with no electricity there in northwest Louisiana. It was arranged for them by Ivy Methvin, Henry's father. This place was so remote that they thought they were safe. But what they didn't realize is that Ivy Methvin was going to betray them.
There was something wrong about that day we went to see Henry's folks.
But we went anyways.
I think that the greatest fear and the greatest danger was not getting shot at a bank robbery. It was that somebody would turn them in for the reward. This was the Depression. That type of money mattered. And I don't think it's a shocker that it happened to Bonnie and Clyde. I think the shock is that they didn't see it coming.
A fellow named John Joyner, a friend of the Methvins, was approached by Henry's father. Said, Henry wants to get away from Bonnie and Clyde.
If they could put Bonnie and Clyde on the spot, as they say, the deal from Texas would be a pardon for Henry for all of his crimes in Texas.
Ivy was the one who cut the deal. Henry was not the one who set him up. Henry wasn't there. It was his dad.
Turns out that the deal reached the ears of Sheriff Jordan. He relayed it to me.
They actually work up a handwritten document that Jordan kept in his desk there that the state of Texas would pardon Henry Methvin for his crimes in exchange for information about Bonnie and Clyde.
Waving a damn piece of paper in front of Henry. And Henry bought it.
I don't want to jinx it, but this time I feel like Clyde's not going to live to see next week. As for Bonnie...
There was some ambivalence on the part of a few of those deputies and sheriffs because they would have to kill a woman, which was something that nobody felt they wanted to do. No one had ever done anything like that before.
I think Hamer thought he might be able to avoid having to kill Bonnie. I think they all did.
The night they met him at the Methvin's family, one of the girls said that Bonnie was pregnant. Well, this is not true, but it gave law enforcement something to worry about. Mr. Methvin told Clyde, he says, at 9 o'clock in the morning, Henry will be at the house. This is the night before. So the deal set. Mr. Methvin, early that morning, come down the road, and they positioned the vehicle because they know what direction Clyde's coming from. This is all preset.
Henry Methvin's father was supposed to park that truck in the southbound lane of this tiny little road, and then he was supposed to pull a wheel off that truck, make it look like it was broken down.
That night, they set the ambush up.
So there's me, my right-hand Manny Galt, the two deputies, Alcon and Hinton, Sheriff Henderson Jordan and his deputy Prentice Oakley.
I think Hamer has a lot of confidence in his own ability. Now, whether he was that confident in the rest of the men in the posse, I don't know.
We pick out our spot, set up camp. I know what I have to do. I just have to make sure the rest of the posse are of the same mind.
Supposedly there is some discussion between the Texas part of the ambush team and the Louisiana part. The county sheriff suggesting that at least the gesture should be made, something to at least give Clyde the opportunity to surrender. The Texas group supposedly thought that that was really useless. They had been tracking this guy for a long time. He never showed any tendency to give up. Hamer said, that's not going to happen this time, whatever it takes.
He's done enough damage already. Widowed enough wives, orphaned enough children. If I see him, I kill him. This time we're ready for Bonnie and Clyde. Everything was set.
I knew that someday, somewhere, someone would betray us.
And who do we see but old man Methvin waiting by the truck on that lonely road in Louisiana?
And naturally, I stopped to see if we could help.
Clyde has to come around. And he tells Mr. Methvin, he says, look, he said, let me pull around the back of your truck. I'll get out and help you put the wheel on. But in the meantime, you got a logging truck all the way. It starts coming from the opposite direction. And he says, let me get out of the way of this logging truck and I'll pull up behind you.
My whole life, death was waiting around every bend in the highway, behind every tree, just biding its time.
It's been a hell of a ride.
Apparently Hamer was supposed to give the signal.
The chief deputy from Louisiana, a fellow named Prentice Oakley, simply took matters into his own hands. Maybe he saw something that told him Clyde was raising a weapon. We don't know why. But on his own, he stood up and emptied his rifle into Clyde's window. And I believe this took everybody by surprise.
Clyde's in first gear. When it kills him, his foot comes off the clutch. The car starts traveling. These officers think, oh my God, he's getting away. So they open fire.
The firing just went on and on. Almost like they believed that they couldn't be killed. So they just killed him about 18 times.
The inevitable end. Retribution. Here is Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker, who died as they lived, by the gun.
Inside the car, they found 10 handguns. They found 2 sawed-off shotguns and 3 full-sized military Browning automatic rifles and about 3,000 rounds of ammunition.
Throngs of people went to Gibbsland where their car and bodies were taken on the back of a flatbed pickup truck, I believe, with the bodies still in the car. They were reaching through the car windows, trying to get any souvenir they could, or they're yanking out hair, ripping off pieces of clothing.
It was seen as the boogeymen had been killed. You know, there was not a lot of outpouring of, oh my. Yeah, there were a few people who said, gosh, did they have to kill Bonnie too? But by and large, Clyde Barrow was seen as a psychopathic stick-up man, and there was nobody who came in and said that was a bad thing that happened to Clyde.
They were known for killing innocent people, and I think the public was probably grateful that they were gone now.
Thousands attend the homecoming of Clyde Barrow. In this Dallas funeral home, his body lies as a never-ending line of men, women, and children from every walk of life file by his casket for a fleeting glimpse of the boy who had wrought so much death and destruction.
Both of their funerals were big events in Dallas, rock concert type crowds.
There was mayhem. My dad said that there just people come and go, you know, it was like a mob.
Hamer, whatever his reputation had been before, it's now nationwide, you might say. He was already almost a legend in the Texas Rangers. This is the culmination of his career. This is the big deal.
I'm just glad we got the job done. Done well.
Frank Hamer went back to lead pretty much a quiet life. There were book offers, there was Hollywood offers, there were things of that nature thrusted upon him that he simply turned down. He didn't want any part of it. He wanted to go back to the quiet life, and he did that. I don't know how any violent criminal who takes up the gun can expect to last very long out on the open road. Bonnie was more fatalistic. She actually penned a very long poem, which she did often. She was a writer. The last one she penned, she gave to her mother less than 20 days before they both died. In it, she mentions that they would both die. She didn't know when, she didn't know how, she simply knew that they would. The poem is titled The Ballad of Bonnie and Clyde. The last line goes something like this.
To few, it'll be grief. To the law, a relief. But it's death for Bonnie and Clyde.